What if I told you the Bible doesn't just have one creation story, but several? And one of them sounds less like Genesis and more like ancient mythological warfare. Today we're diving into Psalm 74, a biblical creation account that looks nothing like the peaceful, poetic structure of Genesis 1. And yet it might just be revealing the same message in a radically different way. Let's start with a contrast. Genesis 1 is what most people think of. Brilliantly structured narrative modeled after a Sabbath cycle. It's orderly, rhythmic. God calmly speaks the universe into being over 6 days. There's no struggle, no violence, no rivals. And as scholar John Currid puts it, the creation account of Genesis presents God as an all-powerful, incomparable, and sovereign. He owes nothing to the agency of another. But Psalm 74, this is a lament written in the aftermath of a catastrophe, the destruction of the temple. And in verses 12 through 14, the psalmist looks backward, recalling God's past power. He states, "You divided the sea by your might. You broke the heads of the sea monsters. You crushed the heads of Leviathan." That doesn't sound like Genesis. That sounds like ancient mythic warfare. But this language, slaying sea monsters, dividing the sea, doesn't just pop up here. It echoes ancient myths from the cultures surrounding Israel, as well as many other places within the biblical text. So the question is, are Genesis 1 and Psalm 74 giving us conflicting creation stories? Or is something deeper going on? And to uncover this, let's back up nearly 150 years. The whole game changed in 1872, when George Smith made known a Babylonian version of the flood story, contained in the longest and greatest literary composition written in cuneiform Akkadian, known today as the Epic of Gilgamesh, and announced 3 years later a Babylonian creation story we know as the Enuma Elish. Since then, scholars have drawn comparisons between Genesis 1 and other myths such as the Babylonian Enuma Elish and the Canaanite Baal cycle. Now there are plenty of others, but this video is just focusing on these two. And in both of these stories, a hero god defeats a chaos monster to bring order. In Enuma Elish, Marduk slays Tiamat, who is conceptualized as the sea, but also as a type of sea dragon and chaos goddess. In the Baal cycle, Baal defeats Yam, the sea, and has other enemies as well, and one of these is Litan or Lotan. And here's where it gets interesting. Tiamat sounds a lot like the Hebrew word Tehom, translated as deep in Genesis 1-2, and Yam is literally the Hebrew word for sea. So is Genesis just copying from these ancient myths? Well, not quite. While there are linguistic similarities, and various interpreters understand the watery deep, the Tehom, as a direct or indirect reference to the Babylonian sea monster Tiamat, scholars like Currid and others note that these connections are not direct borrowings. And in short, there is a growing consensus of opinion that the biblical term Tehom and the Babylonian Tiamat derived from a common Semitic root. Now, there's certainly a lot of discussion and debate around this, but this is traced from Babylonian, Ugarit, and Arabic terms for ocean, sea, deep, and low-lying Arabian coastlands. And because of this, scholars, some of which were previously mentioned, will state that the use of the word Tehom in Genesis 1-2 cannot be used as an argument for a direct dependence of Genesis 1 on the Babylonian Enuma Elish. Instead, Genesis seems to be doing something smarter, reframing familiar mythic language to make a theological point. And here's an example from Genesis 1:21, where it says that God created the Tananim, often translated as sea creatures, but it's the same word used in Psalm 74:13 for sea monsters. And in Genesis, these monsters are not threats. They're not slain. They are simply creations of God. God wasn't battling the chaos. He was commanding it and bringing it into order. And this is also evident when God creates the dome or the firmament in Genesis 1:6-7, where God speaks, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And this is strikingly similar to when Marduk defeats Tiamat in the Babylonian Enuma Elish and divides her body in two and forms heaven from one half and earth from the other half. And so what the author of Genesis 1 is doing is making a bold theological move, because Genesis 1 is written as polemic literature, and it utilizes much of the imagery from the ancient Near East that is often associated with deities. However, as the Dictionary of Deities and Demons states, it demythologizes them. The moon, once a deity known as Yarrick, now just a light. The sun, formerly Shamash, is now a celestial body under Yahweh's rule. Sea monsters, again that we looked at, once divine enemies, are now part of the created order. And as Currid reminds us, he, God, owes nothing to the agency of another. Now back to Psalm 74. Psalm 74 is using imagery from the literature of ancient Ugarit. In verses 13 and 14 it states, "You divided the sea," in Hebrew Yam. But again, Yam in the Baal cycle had to be defeated. Continuing on, "You broke the heads of the sea monsters," the Tananim. Again, the created creature from Genesis 1:22. And in addition to the sea itself, chaos could also be represented as a great sea serpent or dragon in the literature of ancient Ugarit. Verse 14, "You crushed the heads of Leviathan," the Leviathan. And the mythological background of the Bible's reference to Leviathan became apparent with the discovery of the Ugaritic references to a sea monster called Litan, or Lotan. So Psalm 74 isn't contradicting Genesis. It's doing something else. It is calling on God to act again. Scholar Nathaniel Green put it this way. These passages, now he's referring to Psalm 89, 9 through 10, and Isaiah 51, 9 through 11, as well as Psalm 74, 12 through 17, are rehearsing theological history in the form of myth. And he goes on to say later in his article, the author likely hoped that the reuse of inherited creation mythology would cause the deity to engage in the battle once again, leading to the reestablishment of God's reign and the reconstruction of God's temple. So in other words, God, you conquered chaos once before. Do it again. This, just like the creation account of Genesis 1, is polemic literature in its own unique fashion. It acknowledges God's supremacy and is a call for him to restore the cosmic order, just as he did before in Genesis. And it is doing it in a way that mocks the rivaling, neighboring religions of the day in light of the destruction of the place where heaven meets earth, the temple. And so Genesis 1 and Psalm 74 look different because they serve different purposes. Genesis 1 is order from chaos. There's no cosmic battle, and Yahweh reigns above the myth. In Psalm 74, it's a lament, a cry for justice, and it's utilizing mythic memory as a theological weapon. But both, in their own way, proclaim Yahweh's supreme authority over the cosmos and chaos. And that's a far richer message than most of us ever realized. And if you enjoyed this video, you'll love this video that YouTube is recommending for you, or this entire playlist that covers similar topics. And be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below to let me know what you thought. Thank you so much, and I will see you in the next video.